The warning lights flashed red across the control room of Earth's main space station. Something big was coming toward them from the outer edge of the solar system. Admiral Karen Wright stood at the large window looking out at the stars. She had been watching space for 20 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The alien ship was huge. It was at least 3 times bigger than any human ship ever built. But it was not moving like a warship. It was limping through space like a wounded animal. Pieces of metal were floating away from its hull. Strange green gas leaked from holes in its sides. "Admiral, the alien ship is trying to talk to us," said Lieutenant Commander Pete Davis. He was sitting at the communication desk with his headphones on. "The computer is trying to translate what they are saying." Karen walked over to the main screen. The face that appeared there made her step back in surprise. The alien had 6 arms and its skin looked like broken glass. Its eyes were large and blue, and they looked very sad and very tired. "I am Ambassador Zektar of the Velonian Republic," the alien said. The computer made its voice sound strange and electronic. "I come to your world with a request that may seem impossible. My people are dying, and we have nowhere else to turn." Karen looked around the control room. Her team was staring at the screen with wide eyes. In all their years of space travel, humans had met many alien species. Some were friendly, some were not, but none had ever come to Earth begging for help. "What kind of help do you need?" Karen asked. The alien's 6 arms moved in what might have been a gesture of desperation. "The Krex Dominion has attacked our worlds. They have destroyed our fleets. They have burned our colonies. In 37 of your days, they will reach our home planet. When they do, my people will be extinct." Karen felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard stories about the Krex Dominion. They were an empire that conquered other species and took their worlds. They were known for their advanced technology and their ruthless military tactics. "Why come to us?" Karen asked. "Earth is still a young spacefaring civilization. We have only been traveling between stars for 50 years. Zektar's crystalline features seem to brighten slightly. "We have heard stories about your people. Other species in the galaxy speak of humans with respect and fear. They say you have won battles against enemies who had better ships and more advanced weapons. They say you never give up, even when facing impossible odds." Karen almost laughed. The stories the aliens had heard were true, but they did not tell the whole truth. Yes, humans had won some battles against more advanced enemies, but they had also lost many battles. They had survived mostly through luck, stubbornness, and the fact that other species often underestimated them. "Ambassador Zektar," Karen said. "Carefully, I need to discuss this with my government. Can you wait in orbit while we consider your request?" "Of course," the alien replied. "But please understand, time is running out for my people. Every day we delay gives the Krex more time to prepare for their final assault." The screen went dark. Karen turned to her team. "Get me President Dan Carter on the secure line, and call an emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council. We need to make a decision fast." 3 hours later, Karen was sitting in a room deep underground in Washington, D.C. President Carter was there, along with the heads of all the major military branches. The debate had been going on for 2 hours, and voices were getting louder. "We cannot afford to fight the Krex Dominion," said General Bob Mitchell, head of the Space Navy. "Our intelligence reports say they have over 1,000 warships. We have maybe 200 ships total, and half of those are cargo vessels or patrol boats. But if we do nothing, we look weak," argued Admiral Mary Johnson, head of the Space Marines. "Other species will think humans are cowards who abandon their friends. The Velonians are not our friends," General Mitchell shot back. "We met them 3 hours ago. Why should we risk human lives for aliens we do not even know?" President Carter held up his hand for silence. "What are our options?" he asked. "We could send a small diplomatic mission," suggested Secretary of State Linda Brown. "Maybe we can negotiate with the Krex, find some way to avoid a war." "The Krex do not negotiate," said General Mitchell. "They conquer. That is what they do. That is all they do. Then we have no choice but to fight, said Admiral Johnson. With what? General Mitchell asked. Our best ships are protecting our own colonies. Our best pilots are on patrol duty. Our best troops are training new recruits. We cannot pull them away from their duties to fight in a war we cannot win. The room fell silent. Everyone knew General Mitchell was right. Earth's military was stretched thin. They had colonies to protect, trade routes to guard, and borders to patrol. They could not afford to send their best forces on what might be a suicide mission. General Lisa Stone had been sitting quietly in the corner. She was in charge of the Reserve Training Fleet, a collection of older ships used to train new officers. Most people in the room had forgotten she was there. Send us, she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. What did you say? President Carter asked. General Stone stood up. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had been passed over for promotion many times, mostly because she had a habit of speaking her mind when others wanted to hear pleasant lies. Send the 4th Reserve Fleet, she said louder. We are already considered the weakest part of the military. Our ships are old. Our crews are inexperienced. Our officers are the ones who have been rejected by the regular Navy. That is exactly why we cannot send you, said General Mitchell. You would be slaughtered. Maybe, General Stone agreed, but think about it. If we send our best fleet and they lose, it makes humanity look weak. If we send our worst fleet and they lose, we can say they acted without official permission. We can distance ourselves from the defeat. And if they win? Asked President Carter. General Stone smiled for the first time in the meeting. If we win, it sends a very different message. It tells the galaxy that even our weakest forces can defeat the mighty Krex Dominion. It tells them that humanity is not to be underestimated. The room was quiet for a long moment. President Carter looked around the table at his advisors. How many ships are in the 4th Reserve Fleet? 12, General Stone replied. 3 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, and 5 support vessels, about 800 personnel total. Against 1,000 Krex warships, General Mitchell said, it is suicide. War is always suicide for someone, General Stone replied. The question is whether we die with honor or live with shame. President Carter made his decision. General Stone, you have permission to take the 4th Reserve Fleet to the Veonian system. You will be acting under special orders. If you succeed, you will have the full support of the Earth government. If you fail, we will claim you acted without authorization. General Stone nodded. I understand, sir. When do we leave? As soon as possible. Every day we delay is another day closer to the extinction of the Veonian people. As the meeting broke up, General Stone walked over to Admiral Karen Wright. I will need detailed intelligence on the Krex Dominion. Everything we know about their ships, their tactics, their technology. I will get it for you, Karen promised. But Lisa, are you sure about this? The 4th Reserve Fleet is not exactly known for its combat effectiveness. General Stone looked out the window at the stars. No, we are not, but we are known for something else. We are known for not giving up. Sometimes that is enough. 2 days later, the 4th Reserve Fleet began assembling at the outer shipyards. The news of their mission had spread quickly through the military. Some called them heroes. Others called them fools. But everyone agreed on one thing. They were about to attempt the impossible. The 4th Reserve Fleet looked like a collection of spare parts floating in space. The ships were old, their hulls painted over so many times that the original colors were lost under layers of gray and white. Some had dents from training accidents. Others had patches welded over holes that had been repaired too many times to count. Captain Ben Harris stood on the bridge of the USS Determination, the fleet's flagship. He was 53 years old with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He had been commanding reserve ships for 8 years, ever since the incident that ended his career in the regular Navy. He had made a decision that saved civilian lives, but cost the military a valuable outpost. The brass never forgave him for choosing people over property. Captain, "The other ships are reporting ready for departure," said Lieutenant Commander Sue Palmer. She was his second in command, a woman who had been demoted for questioning orders she knew were wrong. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her uniform was perfectly pressed, despite the circumstances. "Thank you, Sue. Signal the fleet to prepare for hyperspace jump." Ben replied the USS Determination was a heavy cruiser that had been built 30 years ago. It was not the fastest ship in the fleet, nor the most heavily armed. But it was solid and reliable, like most of the equipment given to the reserve forces. The regular Navy got the new ships with the advanced weapons and the faster engines. The reserves got the ships that still worked but were no longer considered good enough for real combat. On the bridge of the destroyer USS Defiance, Captain Jake Murphy was reviewing the mission files. Jake was younger than Ben, only 38, but he had been stuck in the reserves for 5 years. He had a reputation for being too aggressive in combat simulations and too casual with military protocol. His superiors said he lacked the discipline for regular fleet duty. "Captain, we are receiving the final intelligence briefing from Earth Command," said Lieutenant Kelly Fox, his navigation officer. She was fresh out of the academy and had been assigned to the reserves because her grades were average. "Not bad. Enough to be dismissed, but not good enough for a posting on a frontline ship." Jake read through the files on his screen. The Krex Dominion had been expanding across the galaxy for over 200 years. They had conquered 47 different species and absorbed their technology and resources. Their ships were works of art, sleek and deadly with energy weapons that could destroy a human ship from a distance of 1,000,000 kilometers. "They have never been defeated," Jake said to his crew. "Not once in 2 centuries of conquest." "Well, there is a first time for everything," said Lieutenant Commander Steve Gray, his weapons officer. Steve was 35 and had been passed over for promotion 6 times. He had a habit of speaking his mind at the wrong moments, which made him unpopular with commanding officers but popular with the enlisted crew. On the light cruiser USS Resolve, Commander Amy Bell was studying the star charts that would take them to the Velonian system. Amy was 32 and had been in the reserves for 3 years. She had been transferred after a disagreement with her admiral about the treatment of enlisted personnel. She believed that officers should take care of their crews, not just use them as tools. "Commander, the medical officer wants to speak with you," said Lieutenant Paul Green, her communications officer. Paul was quiet and methodical, the kind of person who did his job well, but never stood out in a crowd. That was why he was in the reserves instead of on a ship where his skills might be noticed. Dr. Helen Morris was the chief medical officer for the fleet. She was 45 years old and had been practicing medicine for 20 years. She had been transferred to the reserves after a legal case was filed against her. The case was eventually dropped, but the damage to her reputation was permanent. Regular fleet duty required doctors who had never been questioned, even unfairly. "Doctor, what can I do for you?" Amy asked. "I wanted to discuss the medical supplies." "We are carrying," Helen said. "We have enough to treat combat injuries for a short engagement, but if this becomes a long campaign, we will need to resupply." "We are not planning for a long campaign," Amy replied. "Our mission is to help the Velonians defend their home planet. If we cannot do that quickly, we probably cannot do it at all." The fleet's chief engineer was Rob Clark, a brilliant man who had designed improvements to ship engines that were now standard throughout the human fleet. He was also an alcoholic who had been demoted twice for showing up to duty drunk. The regular Navy could not risk having him on a frontline ship, but the reserves were willing to take the chance if it meant getting access to his expertise. "All ships report ready for hyperspace," Rob announced over the fleet communication system. His voice was steady and professional. When he was working, he was the best engineer in the fleet. It was only when he was not working that he became a problem. Ambassador Zektar had remained in orbit around Earth during the 3 days it took to prepare the fleet for departure. The alien had watched the humans assemble their ships with growing concern. The vessels looked old and worn compared to the sleek warships of other species. "Are you certain these ships can help us?" Zektar asked during a final communication with Admiral Karen Wright. They may not look like much, Karen admitted, but they are crewed by people who have something to prove. Never underestimate someone who has been told they are not good enough. The jump to hyperspace was scheduled for 0800 hours. As the time approached, the crews of the 4th Reserve Fleet took their positions. Many of them had never been in real combat. They had trained for it, simulated it, and prepared for it, but they had never faced an enemy who was shooting back with the intent to kill. Fleet Command, this is Captain Harris aboard the USS Determination. 4th Reserve Fleet is ready for departure. Copy that, Captain Harris. You are cleared for hyperspace jump. Good luck, and good hunting. The ships of the 4th Reserve Fleet activated their hyperspace engines simultaneously. The stars stretched into lines of light as the vessels accelerated beyond the speed of light. They were heading toward a system they had never seen to fight. An enemy they had never faced for people they had just met. The journey to the Veonian system would take 18 days. During that time, the crews would drill constantly, preparing for a battle that many of them believed they could not win. But they would fight anyway because that was what humans did. They fought even when the odds were against them, especially when the odds were against them. Captain Ben Harris sat in his cabin reviewing the tactical data on the Crex Dominion. Their technology was superior in every way. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, their defenses stronger. By every measure of military strength, the 4th Reserve Fleet was outmatched, but humans had won battles against superior enemies before. They had done it through courage, creativity, and the refusal to accept defeat. They had done it by fighting in ways their enemies did not expect, using tactics that military academies did not teach. Captain, we are receiving a priority message from the Veonian ambassador. Sue Palmer announced over the intercom. Ben walked to the bridge where Zektar's image appeared on the main screen. The alien looked even more tired than before, its crystalline features dim with exhaustion. Captain Harris, I have received word from our home system. The Crex have begun their final assault. They have destroyed our outer defense platforms and are moving toward the planet. My people have perhaps 20 days before the surface bombardment begins. Ben felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Billions of lives depended on a fleet of misfits and rejects flying outdated ships into a battle they were not expected to win. We understand, Ambassador. We will be there in time. I pray that you will be enough, Zektar replied before the transmission ended. Ben looked around the bridge at his crew. They were young and old, experienced and green, successful and failed. They were the people that the regular Navy had not wanted. But they were also the people who had volunteered for a mission that everyone knew was probably suicide. Sue, signal the fleet. All ships are to begin intensive combat drills. We have 18 days to become the fleet that can defeat the Crex. Dominion, aye, Captain. All ships prepare for combat training. As the 4th Reserve Fleet raced through hyperspace toward the Veonian system, they carried with them the hopes of an entire species and the determination to prove that sometimes the weakest can become the strongest when they have nothing left to lose. The 4th Reserve Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Veonian system and immediately knew they were too late. The sight that greeted them was one of complete devastation. 3 massive defense platforms that had once protected the system hung broken in space like crushed toys. Their metal hulls were split open, and debris floated around them in slow, silent clouds. Captain Ben Harris stood on the bridge of the USS Determination, staring at the destruction through the main view screen. The Veonian fleet was gone. Pieces of their ships drifted among the wreckage of the defense platforms. Some hulls were still recognizable, but most had been reduced to twisted metal and scattered components. My God, whispered Lieutenant Commander Sue Palmer. There must have been hundreds of ships here. And now there are none, Ben replied quietly. Signal the fleet. All ships maintain radio silence and passive sensors only. We need to assess the situation before we announce our presence. The Crex Dominion fleet was positioned in a perfect formation around the planet Velonis Prime. Their ships were beautiful in a terrifying way. Each vessel was a work of art, with smooth curves and gleaming hulls that reflected the light of the system's star. Energy fields pulsed along their surfaces like living things, and their weapons arrays were larger than entire human ships. Captain Jake Murphy counted the enemy vessels from the bridge of the USS Defiance. "I make it 37 ships," he reported. "To the fleet, all of them bigger than anything we have." "Confirmed," replied Commander Amy Bell from the USS Resolve. "Their smallest ship is twice the size of our largest. And look at those weapons. I have never seen energy cannons that big." The Krex fleet was arranged in 3 rings around the planet. The inner ring consisted of massive battleships with enough firepower to destroy a moon. The middle ring was made up of cruisers and destroyers, each one bristling with weapons. The outer ring was composed of support vessels and what appeared to be troop transports. "They are not just blockading the planet," observed Chief Engineer Rob Clark over the fleet. "Communication system? They are preparing for a full-scale invasion." As the human fleet watched, the Krex began their assault on the planet's surface. Beams of purple energy lanced down from the battleships, striking military installations and government buildings. The bombardment was precise and methodical, designed to destroy the planet's ability to resist without damaging the infrastructure they would need after conquest. "Captain Harris, we are receiving a transmission from the Krex fleet," reported. "Lieutenant Paul Green, they know we are here." The main screen flickered and the face of Admiral Decaron appeared. The Krex commander was a massive creature with a shell-like head and 6 eyes that glowed with a cold intelligence. When it spoke, its voice was translated by the computer into something that sounded like grinding metal. "So the humans have finally arrived," Decaron said. "We have been expecting you. Your reputation precedes you across the galaxy. Tales of your victories against superior foes have reached even our ears." Ben stepped forward so the alien could see him clearly. "This is Captain Ben Harris of the Human 4th Reserve Fleet. You are ordered to withdraw from this system immediately and cease all attacks on the Velonian Republic." Admiral Decaron's response was a sound that the computer interpreted as laughter. "Your reputation appears to be greatly exaggerated, Captain. We were told that humanity would send their finest warriors to face us. Instead, they send us a collection of ancient ships crewed by their rejects and failures." The Krex admiral gestured with one of his 4 arms, and the image shifted to show a tactical display of the human fleet. 12 ships against 37. Outdated weapons against advanced energy systems. Primitive armor against plasma cannons that can atomize matter at the molecular level. "Tell me, Captain, how do you plan to achieve victory with such inferior resources?" Ben felt the eyes of his crew on him. They were waiting for him to say something inspiring, something that would give them hope in the face of impossible odds. But he had no clever words or brilliant strategies. He had only the truth. "We plan to fight," he said simply. "That is what humans do. We fight." "How wonderfully naive," Decaron replied. "We have studied your species extensively, Captain. We know your tactics, your technology, your limitations. You rely on kinetic weapons that cannot penetrate our shields. Your ships are held together with metal alloys that will melt under the heat of our plasma cannons. Your crews are trained for battles against opponents of similar technological levels, not against the superior forces of the Krex Dominion." The alien leaned closer to the camera, his 6 eyes focusing on Ben with predatory intensity. "We have conquered 47 species, Captain. Some had technology superior to yours. Some had larger fleets. Some had more experience in warfare. All of them believed they could defeat us. All of them were wrong." "There is always a first time," Ben replied. "Indeed there is. Today will be the first time we destroy a human fleet. It will not be the last." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the USS Determination in silence. Ben looked around at his crew. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes. But they were also determined. They had volunteered for this mission knowing it was probably suicide. They were here because they believed in something larger than themselves. "All ships, this is Captain Harris," he announced over the fleet communication system. "You have all heard what we are facing. The enemy has superior numbers, superior technology, and superior firepower. By every measure of military strength, we should not be here. We should have stayed home and let someone else handle this problem." He paused, looking out at the stars where the Krex fleet waited. "But we are here. We are here because someone had to answer the call for help. We are here because extinction is not acceptable as long as there is someone willing to stand in its way. We are here because we are human, and humans do not abandon their friends." The response came from every ship in the fleet. "Aye, Captain, the enemy thinks they know us," Ben continued. "They think they understand our limitations. They have studied our tactics and our technology. They believe they are prepared for everything we can do. They are wrong." On the bridge of the USS Defiance, Jake Murphy smiled grimly. "What are your orders, Captain?" "We give them exactly what they expect," Ben replied. "We attack their formation with conventional tactics. We use our standard weapons and our normal maneuvers. We let them think they were right about us." "And then?" asked Commander Amy Bell. "Then we show them what they were not prepared for. We show them that humans do not fight fair when the survival of innocent people is at stake." The Krex fleet began to move, their ships shifting into an attack formation with mechanical precision. Energy weapons charged with visible power and fighter bays open to reveal swarms of small craft. The aliens were confident in their superiority, certain that the coming battle would be a simple matter of destroying inferior opponents. Admiral Vicaron stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human ships on his tactical display. "Begin the attack," he ordered. "Target their largest ship first. Once their flagship is destroyed, the rest will surrender or flee." The first salvo of plasma fire lit up the darkness of space like artificial stars. The purple beams reached across the void toward the human fleet, carrying enough energy to vaporize anything they touched. The battle for the Velonian system had begun. Captain Ben Harris watched the incoming fire and gave the order that would determine the fate of billions of lives. "All ships, evasive maneuvers, execute Plan Alpha." The 4th Reserve Fleet scattered. Like leaves in the wind, their ships moving in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully choreographed. They had 18 days to prepare for this moment, 18 days to plan for a battle against impossible odds. The Krex had superior technology and overwhelming firepower. But the humans had something the aliens did not expect: the absolute refusal to accept defeat and the willingness to sacrifice everything for people they had never met but had chosen to call friends. The purple beams of plasma fire crossed the void like deadly lightning, each one carrying enough energy to melt through the hull of a human ship. The 4th Reserve Fleet scattered in all directions, their old engines pushing them to speeds that made their hulls groan and their crews grip their seats. Captain Ben Harris felt the USS Determination shake as a plasma bolt passed close enough to overload their shields. The bridge lights flickered and the smell of burned electronics filled the air. "Damage report," he shouted over the noise of straining engines. "Hull integrity holding, but our port shields are down to 60%, reported Lieutenant Commander Sue Palmer. "That was too close, Captain." "It was supposed to be," Ben replied. "Signal the fleet." "Execute maneuver Charlie 7. The human ships began weaving through the debris field left by the destroyed Velonian fleet. The broken hulls and twisted metal provided cover from the Krex weapons, but they also made navigation dangerous. One wrong move would send a ship crashing into a chunk of debris moving at thousands of kilometers per hour. Captain Jake Murphy piloted the USS Defiance through the wreckage like he was racing through an obstacle course. His crew held on as the ship rolled and dove, avoiding both enemy fire and floating debris. "This is insane," muttered Lieutenant Kelly Fox as another plasma beam scorched past their starboard side. "Insane is what we do best," Jake replied with a grin. "Steve, return fire on the nearest Krex cruiser. Let them know we are not just going to run and hide." The USS Defiance's kinetic cannons opened fire, sending streams of metal projectiles toward the enemy formation. The rounds were primitive compared to the Krex energy weapons, but they were fast and hard to see coming. Several projectiles struck the alien cruiser's shields, causing them to flicker and spark. Direct hits on target, reported Lieutenant Commander Steve Gray. No significant damage, but we got their attention. The Krek's response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 enemy ships turned their weapons toward the USS Defiance, filling the space around it with deadly energy. Jake threw his ship into a desperate spiral, using the wreckage of a Velonian battleship as cover. They are adapting to our movement patterns, observed the Krek's tactical officer on Admiral Lecaron's flagship. The human ships are becoming more unpredictable. Irrelevant, Lecaron replied. Their ships cannot withstand our firepower indefinitely. Continue the assault. Focus fire on their largest vessels. But the humans were not trying to win a conventional battle. While the Kreks concentrated their fire on the USS Determination and the other large ships, Commander Amy Bell led a group of smaller vessels on a wide flanking maneuver. The USS Resolve and 2 escort ships moved around the edge of the battle, staying hidden behind the planet's moon. Commander, we are in position for the supply run, reported Lieutenant Paul Green. The Kreks are completely focused on the main battle. Amy looked at her tactical display. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. Begin the drop. All cargo bays, release supplies on my mark. The USS Resolve and her escorts dove toward the planet's surface at maximum speed. Their cargo bays opened, and containers began falling toward Velonis Prime. The Krek sensors detected the movement, but the aliens dismissed it as a desperate evacuation attempt. The humans are trying to resupply the planet, reported a Kreks. Officer, shall we target the supply drops? Admiral Lecaron waved one of his 4 arms dismissively. Let them waste their resources. It will not change the outcome of this battle. The containers falling toward the planet were not filled with weapons or ammunition. They contained medical supplies, communication equipment, food synthesizers, and manufacturing blueprints. Chief Engineer Rob Clark had spent weeks designing equipment that could be built using whatever materials the Velonians had available. On the planet's surface, the surviving Velonian resistance forces watched the human supply drop with growing hope. They had been fighting a losing battle against the Krek's ground forces, but the arrival of human technology gave them new possibilities. Ambassador Zektar emerged from an underground bunker to coordinate the distribution of supplies. The crystalline alien 6 arms moved quickly as it organized the resistance into effective units. The humans have given us more than supplies, it announced to the gathered fighters. They have given us hope. The battle in space continued to rage. The USS Determination took a direct hit from a Krek's battleship, and the explosion tore through the ship's hull. Emergency lights flashed red on the bridge as damage control teams rushed to contain the breach. We have lost main power to the forward. Weapons array, reported Sue Palmer. Hull breach on deck 7, 17 casualties. Ben gritted his teeth. They were losing this battle, just as everyone had expected. But losing was not the same as being defeated. Signal Captain Murphy. Tell him to initiate Plan Delta. Jake Murphy received the message and smiled grimly. Plan Delta was the most dangerous part of their strategy, the move that would either win the battle or get them all killed trying. All right, people, this is it. Steve, load the special cargo into tubes 1 through 4. Kelly, plot a ramming. Course for the Krek's flagship. The USS Defiance turned toward Admiral Lecaron's massive ship, its engines burning at maximum power. The Krek's commander watched the approaching human vessel with what might have been amusement. The humans are attempting a ramming attack, reported his tactical officer. Shall we destroy them? No, Lecaron replied. Let them come. I want to see the desperation in their eyes as they realize their primitive tactics are useless against our superior technology. But Jake had no intention of actually ramming the flagship. As the USS Defiance approached the alien vessel, it released its special cargo, a massive cloud of metallic particles mixed with small explosive devices. The cloud looked like space dust, harmless and insignificant. The Krek's energy weapons were designed to target solid objects, not clouds of tiny particles. The defensive systems ignored the approaching cloud, focusing instead on the ship that had released it. The USS Defiance veered away at the last second, leaving the cloud to drift into the flagship shields. The metallic particles passed through the energy barriers like they were not there. The Krex shields were designed to stop large objects and energy beams, not microscopic fragments. When the particles reached the ship's hull, the explosive devices detonated. The explosions were small individually, but there were thousands of them. They peppered the flagship's hull like tiny hammers, disrupting systems and creating weak points in the armor. The damage was not enough to destroy the ship, but it was enough to disable its main weapons and create vulnerabilities. Impossible. Admiral Vecaron shouted as his ship shuddered under the impacts. How did they penetrate our shields? The particles are too small for our defensive systems to detect, his tactical officer replied. They passed through the shields as if they were not there. On the planet's surface, the Veonian resistance had put the human supplies to good use. The manufacturing blueprints allowed them to build crude but effective weapons using local materials. Railguns constructed from mining equipment began firing at the Krex ships from the surface, their projectiles adding to the chaos of the space battle. The communication equipment allowed the resistance to coordinate their attacks with the human fleet. For the first time since the invasion began, the defenders were fighting as a unified force instead of isolated groups. The surface installations are targeting our ships, reported another Krex officer. They are using weapons we have never seen before. Admiral Vecaron's confidence was beginning to crack. The battle was not going according to plan. The humans were fighting in ways that their intelligence had not predicted. They were using tactics that military schools did not teach. All ships, concentrate fire on the human flagship, Vecaron ordered. If we destroy their command ship, the rest will surrender. The Krex fleet turned its attention to the USS Determination, which was already badly damaged from the previous attacks. Energy beams converged on the human ship from multiple directions, overwhelming its shields and tearing through its hull. Captain, we are taking massive damage, Supama reported. Hull breaches on multiple decks. We are losing life support. Ben looked around the bridge at his crew. They were still at their posts, still doing their jobs even though they all knew the ship was dying. Send a message to the fleet, tell them it has been an honor to serve with them. But before he could give the order to abandon ship, something unexpected happened. The other human vessels, instead of retreating, moved closer to the USS Determination. They formed a protective circle around the damaged flagship, their own ships taking hits to shield their commander. What are they doing? Demanded Admiral Vecaron. They are sacrificing themselves for a single ship. It appears to be a human characteristic, his tactical officer replied. They value their comrades above their own survival. The Krex had studied human military tactics, but they had not understood human nature. They had prepared for a battle against logical opponents who would retreat when faced with superior force. They had not prepared for enemies who would die. For each other without hesitation, the battle continued, but something had changed. The humans were no longer fighting just to survive. They were fighting to protect each other. The battle had been raging for 3 hours when everything changed. The USS Determination was badly damaged, its hull breached in a dozen places and its weapons barely functional. But Captain Ben Harris refused to give up. His crew worked frantically to keep the ship fighting, patching holes with whatever materials they could find. Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the planet, reported Lieutenant Commander Sue Palmer. Her uniform was torn and her face was streaked with smoke, but her voice was steady. The Veonian resistance is ready to coordinate a final assault. Ben looked at the tactical display. The human fleet was down to 8 ships, all of them damaged. The Krex still had 29 vessels, though several had been disabled by the unconventional human tactics. By every measure of military strength, the humans should have been defeated hours ago. Signal the fleet, Ben ordered. All ships prepare for Operation Sunrise. Operation Sunrise was their final plan, the desperate gamble they had hoped they would never need to use. It required perfect timing and more luck than any sane person would rely on. But they were no longer sane people fighting a normal battle. They were humans protecting innocent lives. and that made them capable of impossible things on the planet's surface. Ambassador Zektar coordinated the resistance from a command bunker deep underground. The Velonian had been amazed by the ingenuity of the human supply drop. The equipment the humans had sent was not just tools and weapons, but the blueprints for hope itself. "All units, this is command," Zektar announced over the communication network the humans had provided. "Prepare for synchronized strike. Target the Krex command ship when the humans begin their attack." The Velonian fighters had spent the last 3 hours building weapons from the human blueprints. They were crude devices made from mining equipment and industrial machinery, but they were effective. More importantly, they were made with the kind of determination that comes from fighting for survival. In space, Captain Jake Murphy prepared the USS Defiance for what would probably be its final mission. The ship had taken severe damage, but its engines still worked and its weapons could still fire. That was all Jake needed for what he had planned. "Steve, load every torpedo tube with our remaining special cargo," Jake ordered. "Kelly, set course for the Krex flagship. Full power to engines." Lieutenant Commander Steve Gray looked at his captain with concern. "Jake, if we get too close to that ship, they will tear us apart." "That is the idea," Jake replied with a grim smile. "Sometimes the best way to win is to make the enemy think they are winning." The USS Defiance accelerated toward Admiral Vekaron's flagship, its damaged hull glowing from the heat of overloaded engines. The Krex commander watched the approaching ship with satisfaction. Finally, the humans were making a mistake he could exploit. "All weapons, target that ship," Vekaron ordered. "Destroy it before it can reach us." The Krex battleship's energy weapons opened fire, sending streams of purple death toward the human destroyer. Jake threw his ship into a series of evasive maneuvers that pushed both the vessel and its crew to their limits. Plasma beams scorched past the hull, close enough to melt external sensors and communications arrays. "We are not going to make it," Kelly Fox said through gritted teeth as she fought to keep the ship on course. "Yes, we are," Jake replied, "because we have something they do not expect." At the last possible moment, the USS Defiance released its entire cargo of metallic particles and explosives. But this time, the cloud was different. Rob Clark had modified the explosive devices to create a chain reaction, each detonation triggering others in a cascade of destruction. The particle cloud enveloped the Krex flagship like a deadly fog. The tiny explosives detonated in sequence, creating a wave of destruction that rippled across the alien ship's hull. The damage was catastrophic. Primary weapon systems failed, shield generators overloaded, and hull breaches appeared throughout the vessel. "Impossible!" Admiral Vekaron shouted as his ship died around him. "Our shields should have protected." "U.S. The particles are too small for our defensive systems," his tactical officer replied. "They treat the cloud as harmless debris, but the real surprise came from the planet's surface." The Velonian resistance had been waiting for this moment. When the Krex flagship was disabled and vulnerable, hundreds of railguns fired simultaneously, their projectiles converging on the damaged battleship from multiple angles. The crude weapons built from human blueprints punched through the flagship's weakened hull like hammers through glass. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship as ammunition stores and fuel tanks ignited. The mighty vessel that had led the conquest of 47 worlds began to break apart. "Admiral, the flagship is destroyed," reported a Krex officer from another ship. "Admiral Vekaron is dead." The destruction of their flagship sent shockwaves through the Krex fleet. They had never faced an enemy that could destroy their most powerful ship. Their entire military doctrine was based on technological superiority and overwhelming force. They had no plan for dealing with enemies who refused to fight fair. Commander Amy Bell seized the moment of confusion. The USS Resolve and the remaining human ships launched a coordinated attack on the Krex formation. Their weapons were still primitive compared to the alien technology, but they were aimed by people who had nothing left to lose. "All ships, concentrate fire on the nearest Krex cruiser," Amy ordered. "Show them what happens when they threaten innocent people." The human ships swarmed around the alien vessel like angry wasps. Their kinetic weapons hammered at the Krex shields until they collapsed, then tore through the hull beneath. The alien cruiser tried to retreat, but the human ships pursued relentlessly on the planet's surface. The Velonian resistance launched attacks throughout the occupied territories. The communication equipment provided by the humans allowed them to coordinate their efforts with devastating effect. Krex ground forces found themselves under attack from every direction by enemies using weapons they had never seen before. The tide of battle had turned completely. The Krex fleet, which had seemed invincible just hours before, was now scattered and demoralized. Ships that had conquered entire star systems fled from a handful of human vessels crewed by rejects and failures. "This is impossible," transmitted the new Krex commander, Admiral Vexstar, who had assumed control after Thekaron's death. "We have superior technology. We have more ships. We have centuries of military experience. How are we losing to these primitives?" Captain Ben Harris, his uniform torn and his face blackened with smoke, appeared on the communications screen. Behind him, the bridge of the USS Determination was a wreck of sparking electronics and emergency lighting. But his voice was steady and strong. "You made a mistake, Admiral," Ben said. "You studied our technology and our tactics, but you never understood what makes us human. We do not fight just with weapons and ships. We fight with everything we have, everything we are, and everything we refuse to give up." "You cannot defeat us," Vexstar replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "We are the Krex Dominion. We have never been defeated." "There is a first time for everything," Ben replied. "And today is your first time facing humans who have decided that your conquest ends here." The remaining Krex ships began to withdraw from the system, their formation breaking apart as individual captains decided that survival was more important than victory. The mighty fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 centuries was retreating from a force they had dismissed as insignificant. "This is not over," Admiral Vexstar transmitted as his ships prepared to jump to hyperspace. "The Krex Dominion will return with a larger fleet. We will study your tactics and prepare countermeasures." "You are welcome to try," Ben replied. "But remember this day, Admiral. Remember that the species you dismissed as primitive defeated your best fleet with their worst ships. And next time we might send our good ships." As the Krex fleet disappeared into hyperspace, the surviving human vessels gathered around the damaged USS Determination. They had won an impossible victory, but the cost had been high. 4 ships had been destroyed, and hundreds of crew members had given their lives. Ambassador Zektar's transmission came from the planet's surface, where the Velonian people were emerging from their shelters to see the sunrise over a world that was still free. "Captain Harris, my people owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You came to our aid when we had no hope. You fought for us when others would have abandoned us." Ben looked around the bridge at his surviving crew. They were tired, injured, and traumatized by the battle they had just fought, but they were also proud. They had proven that sometimes the weakest could become the strongest when they had something worth fighting for. "We did what humans do, Ambassador," Ben replied. "We stood with our friends when they needed us most. That is who we are." The 4th Reserve Fleet had won the impossible battle. More importantly, they had sent a message to the galaxy that humanity would not abandon those who asked for help. The species that had been dismissed as primitive had shown that courage and determination could triumph over superior technology. In the years that followed, the Battle of Velonis Prime would be remembered as the day the Krex Dominion learned that some enemies are too stubborn to defeat, no matter how advanced their weapons or how overwhelming their numbers.